Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story. Hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's got to be reality and not illusion or delusion that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views. And, well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Joel Skousen, who's with us on a cell phone, but would rather have Joel on a cell phone than many people on a hard line. Hi, Joel. How are we doing?
I'm just fine, Dr. Stan. Hope you can hear me fine.
Go right ahead.
Well, let's begin with politics. After over a week of silence following Rand Paul's soft endorsement of Mitt Romney, constitutional conservative movement mentor Ron Paul has finally made firm his intention not to endorse the GOP presumed nominee. On CNN's daily broadcast, Blitzer asked Ron Paul on Tuesday if he was ready to endorse Mitt Romney, and he said, "No, I'm not ready to do that. No way." And then he said again, "No way," for emphasis. Well, that was good news, and vindicates those of us who felt strongly that Ron Paul could not, in fact, ever endorse Mitt Romney with his horrible foreign policy position. And there's some other iterations of that, which we'll discuss later on in the broadcast. On other issues, the second-place finisher in the nomination race was conciliatory. Ron Paul declined to endorse the lawsuit filed by some of his followers against the Republican National Committee for violating their own rules, seeing that it was sufficient that others do it. I think he should have unequivocally stated his support for the suit. It was obvious from the litany of violations Ron Paul listed on the air with Wolf Blitzer that there was more than sufficient grounds, and Ron Paul himself had legal standing to challenge these. By his not joining the suit directly, he runs the risk that courts can dismiss the suit on lack of standing. He also downplayed the role of his backers preparing for a major alternative convention bash at the Tampa Fairgrounds during the Republican National Committee or convention, and publicly called for civility in his followers' response. And that's, probably the fourth or fifth time he's made that public call for civility. So he's obviously very sensitive to the fact, to the media, mainstream media's charges they've leveled against his followers' harsh tactics. Of course, the news never breathes a word about the illegal tactics of the establishment that engenders such outrage among his followers. I have no doubt as well that the establishment has infiltrated radicals into the Ron Paul movement in order to help justify these attacks on his followers. We'll no doubt see more of them at the GOP convention in Tampa. So the elder Paul seems to send two messages: rally the troops for the alternate convention show that he's planning, and imply that he's making no demands upon nor deals with the Romney nomination convention. It's clear that Ron is not willing to play the same kind of hardball tactics that they are. He did say that he would attempt to use his large number of delegates to steer the future direction of the GOP, which is short for the Grand Old Party, the Republican Party. But as we all know, the RNC cares nothing about what the grassroots think, and the party platforms, no matter how strict, are never allowed to bind the candidates or the party leaders from taking opposite positions.
But I think, Joe, we have to recognize the fact that the people who control the Republican Party are part of the establishment. These are not honest people. They actually, of course, create wars and revolutions. They kill people. They have professional assassins. I've talked to government assassins who actually have been assigned to kill people. And yet we're supposed to not even mention this sort of thing. They have no intention at all of allowing the will of the American people to be heard. And I think that somebody at a national level platform has to bring this fact out.
Well, I agree with you, Stan, and that's why I'm concerned that Ron Paul, being such a nice guy, is perhaps too nice a guy for...
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty. Our guest this afternoon is Joel Skousen, and he's discussing the fact that Ron Paul has come out in public and said he will not endorse Mitt Romney, that he cannot endorse Mitt Romney under any circumstances, but he's asking his delegates to be civil there and not to put on any demonstrations of the Republican National Committee. Personally, my view is that what we're dealing with is a power structure with people who are totally unscrupulous and a man who's trying to be very nice and polite. And as I pointed out just a moment ago before our new stations joined us, why, the establishment that controls the Republican Party and behind Mitt Romney hires professional assassins, or invisible government, which controls this group. I mean, hires assassins. I've interviewed them. We have our interviews with government assassins who've been assigned to kill people. They start wars. They killed 1 million people in Iraq by simply lying to the American people about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I mean, they killed suddenly, 58,000 American boys by lying to us about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. They consistently lie, and somebody has to stand up and say, don't you understand, we have a visible government. We also have an invisible government, and the invisible government, of course, controls the chains of both political parties and makes mockery out of the electoral process. I have no question at all that they rig elections and that they actually will use fraudulent, perjured testimony to send people that they don't like to prison. And I can give a number of instances where I personally know that they've actually had people killed or used perjured testimony to send them to prison. Somebody has to say this. Go right ahead, Joel.
Well, there's an older book on the market written in the 80s called, by Rodney Stitch on
Defrauding America.
Defrauding America, that's right, Defrauding America.
Right.
It's the best single volume to talk about all of the whistleblowers in government within CIA, DEA, and FAA, and everyone else who have been taken down by these kinds of false testimonies and how the courts are rigged to keep sending them to prison. It's you can get a copy of that book. It's just a minute. I think you carry it.
Yes, we do carry the book, Defrauding America by Rodney Stitch, and we've recommended strongly. Go ahead.
Well, so while Ron Paul both strengthened one position and softened others, his son Rand Paul slightly modified his endorsement of Romney, which has had such a negative impact on both the movement and Rand's future leadership in the movement. First, he issued a statement in...
I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for just a moment when we bring our stations on board. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Joe was simply saying that Rand Paul, now this is not Ron, but Rand Paul has simply modified his position as far as the endorsement of Mitt Romney. What has he said?
Well, he issued a statement in National Review indicating his views on the grounds of attacking Iran are different from those of Mitt Romney. But that didn't help very much. He was only slightly clear when he said in another interview, I endorsed Governor Romney for many reasons, not the least of which is that we simply cannot afford 4 more years of President Obama. Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, an out-of-control EPA and the NLRB, and trillion-dollar deficits are combining to strangle our economy. He further said, I am afraid that if that chokehold is not released quickly, our country may quickly follow Europe into destruction. Anyone who doesn't believe there is a difference between the two candidates on economic issues is simply not looking or not being honest with their assessment. Now, that's what he said on the economy. My comment is I don't really think there's much difference between Romney and Obama, even on the economy. Romney won't rein in the Fed and thinks Bernanke's doing a good job. Secondly, there's no political will to make deep cuts in spending, even if Romney were to propose deep cuts, which I don't think he will. The little business initiative that Romney may propose won't fix the giant debt problem, which will eventually sink us. Then he talked about foreign policy, and here's how he starts out. Rand Paul, where I don't know if there's as much of a difference as I would like is foreign policy. Now, how's that for starting out? I mean, there's a huge difference in foreign policy. How can he start out by saying, I don't know that there's what kind of difference there is? It's not very reassuring. President Obama, he said, was elected on the platform of ending wars, yet he has opposed every effort made by me and others in the Senate to do that. He opposed my resolutions to end the Iraq War. He has refused my urgings to end the war in Afghanistan more quickly. Started another war in Libya, and this time went further into unconstitutional territory than previous presidents by not even seeking congressional approval, whatever. Anyone who believes President Obama is less aggressive internationally than his predecessor is mistaken. Then he continues. Rand Paul says, I do not know yet if I will find a Romney presidency more acceptable on foreign policy. But I do know that I must oppose the recent statement made by Mitt Romney. Well, this is a good start, then. He continues, in which he says, as president, he would take us into war unilaterally with Iran without any approval from Congress. Paul continues to say the Constitution clearly states that it is Congress that has the powers to declare war, not the president. And even the War Powers Act also clearly states the U.S. forces are to engage in hostilities only if circumstances are pursuant to, 1, a declaration of war, meaning that it's leading to a declaration of war, or 2, the specific statutory authorization has been made, and 3, a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States or its territories or possessions or armed forces has happened. Well, none of those criteria, even in the War Powers Act, have been made clear, even if the War Powers Act was constitutional, which I don't think it is. Nevertheless, I can just picture Romney surrounded by neocon legal advisors instructing him on the establishment of legal precedents justifying presidential powers necessary to go to war unilaterally, and Romney nodding in agreement and soaking it all up. Sad how otherwise good people lose all sense of warning signals, of conscience, and surrounded by people who have made it in the world and are guiding or allowed to guide their thinking. I've heard several people say, do you want to comment before I go on?
No, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. But basically, they can come up with a false flag operation, another phony issue, another phony Gulf of Tonkin incident, another a phony war, another phony attack. I mean, they can do all sorts of things to justify taking us into a war to give Romney justification. But I have no qualms at all with saying that Romney will take us into another war if that is what the globalists want.
And that's why you have to have someone in office who is skeptical of every one of those desires, not who's sitting as an admiring person of all these high-powered people advising him, and Ron Paul would sit there and challenge every one of those statements. And if he didn't get a straight answer, he'd task investigative people to go out and find the answers independent of these people. But Romney will not. I've heard many people, actually several people, say that Mitt Romney is one of the smartest guys I've ever met. Now, I disagree. There's more to wisdom than smarts. Raw intelligence means nothing if you can't sense evil, if you can't sense danger, you can't sense deception when it stares you in the face. And Romney has indicated to me that he can't see those things. In review, I see Ron Paul as being too much of a nice guy at this stage in the battle. He's done a great job of building a movement, but a much stronger hand is needed now to guide the liberty movement as it moves into more open battle with the establishment. You have to confront the issues of lying, deception, and conspiracy, which Ron Paul, being a nice guy, has been so far unwilling to challenge them on those regards. Rand Paul's softening of his endorsement of Romney still has the aura of character weakness mixed with that dangerous desire to play both sides. This recent clarification does not change my position that Rand Paul lacks the backbone to lead this fight in his father's stead. Well, in other news concerning the Romney campaign, he continues to cavort with the full range of globalists and neocons in his quest for the presidency and acceptance by the establishment. As the Daily Caller wrote this week, presumptive nominee Romney is holding an exclusive summer retreat this weekend in Utah that will include appearances by the most frequently mentioned potential vice presidential choices, except Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. Special guests, according to the invitation, include Florida Governor Jeb Bush, Bobby Jindal, that's Governor of Louisiana, Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty, Ohio Senator Rob Portman, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, Wisconsin Representative Paul Ryan, and South Dakota Senator John Thune. All have been mentioned as possible running mates. The invitation for the Romney Victory Founding Members Retreat says the event will take place at the Chateau in Park City, a very luxurious place in Utah. From Friday to Sunday, the retreat is for Romney's top campaign donors who have given more than $50,000, and they're personally hosting the event. One such meeting, says the invitation, includes a media panel, which will be moderated by lawyer Ben Ginsberg, who's on the other side, including the Weekly Standard's Fred Barnes and Bill Kristol, those are the chief neocons in the country, as well as Republican operatives Mary Madeline and Karl Rove, who, you know, is the infamous leader behind the Bush deception of conservatives. Other speakers at the meetings include former Secretary James Baker, a globalist, Arizona Senator John McCain. I don't have enough adjectives to explain to introduce that traitor to American MIAs and POWs. Alabama Representative Spencer Backus, Minnesota Senator Norm Coleman, Bob Corker, and former Utah Governor Mike Leavitt. All of these guys are either outright enemies or naive fellow travelers with the globalists, hoping to be let inside the club. And Rubio is on a book tour. This is the necessary prelude to any political campaign, but his exclusion from the event comes after reporters on Tuesday were told by Romney's campaign that he was not being vetted as a running mate. Following those reports and the shock from Rubio's supporter, Romney made a rare statement on the topic that said Rubio is being considered as vice president. So we really don't know, but this is going to be a major event. And even worse news, of course, is that following this big summer retreat this weekend, Romney will attend a special event in Stamford, Connecticut, featuring Henry Kissinger, which should really get conspiracy tongues wagging. Newsmax says Henry Kissinger will headline an event in Stamford, Connecticut. The former Secretary of State to President Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford will appear with Romney and Romney's brother at the event, which will be at none other than the Trump Tower in Stamford. Interestingly, they reported that a New York Times said that Kissinger was waiting on the sidelines out of concern about Romney's China policy. According to the Times, Kissinger had concerns about Romney's aggressive statements on trade policy toward China. Kissinger, when serving under Nixon, helped open relations with China and had clients with interests there. Well, that last statement doesn't even come close to approaching the conniving, evil guidance Kissinger has provided to China as he betrayed Vietnam to the enemy at the Paris peace talks and colluded with the Chinese to throw Taiwan out of the UN and allow China not only to replace Taiwan, but get a seat on the all-powerful Security Council. If there's any example of a greater evil conspirator in the globalist conspiracy for the New World Order, it's Henry Kissinger. So these establishment concerns about Romney's hard comments on Russia and China are probably the only two areas of foreign policy that the establishment is displeased about with Romney, hence the attempt to make deeper inroads into his camp of advisors and the desire to support him, his election, or at least the appearance of that support. Mark my words, if Romney ever becomes president, he will start placating China and playing up to Russia, just like Obama and Bush. While the rest of the arch-conservative world decries this latest soiree with Kissinger as proof that Romney is an insider, it is not necessarily so. There's a lot of middle ground in the transition from naive conservative to in-the-know and corrupt insider, and most people don't make the full transition, even though they start through the process, and even some of them join the Council on Foreign Relations and never become conspirators in the globalist movement. They do, relish the globalists, that is, bringing in naive conservatives into the circle so as to deflect criticism or the ability of conservatives to see everyone as a member, therefore they're a conspirator. Too many in our own camp are all too quick to jump to the conclusion that a conservative has sold out or joined the other side as soon as he has any association with a major globalist.
Well, I think whether they are sitting on the other side or whether they're controlled by somebody's on the other side, the policies, certainly the leaders of both political parties, are always the same. They're always for globalism. They're always for increasing power of government over our lives. And step by step, while we're moving away from the traditional American position of limited government and a sovereign state to simply an all-powerful government and simply surrendering the sovereignty of America to the one world government, the one world religion. and the coming one-world ruler. Go right ahead, Joe.
Well, the reason I'm making this point, Stan, is that by my long experience in Washington and other places, I know that the establishment employs many useful idiots, as Lenin called them, and naive Christians who can easily be led along by carefully crafted lies and pretensions of good global intentions. As I've said before, there's one important criteria that must be met before someone is even considered for crossing the line between fellow traveler and a real insider. The powers to be never let anyone inside who hasn't been grossly immoral. Homosexual sin will do, but for their purposes, homosexual sin is even a better test of the loss of principle that is necessary to qualify to join the evil ranks. For all of Romney's disgusting desires to seek approval of the establishment, he doesn't qualify in this core compromise. And I don't think he will ever cross that line and be unfaithful to his wife. That doesn't mean they can't use him as long as he willingly remains blind to conspiracy, but they won't let him near black operations where he might see too much. So why take a chance on letting a non-insider into the White House? Well, the answer to that is sometimes they fail at controlling everything and have to deal with resistance. It's likely that they don't want to take the chance of letting Romney into the White House and will try and get Obama reelected. But Obama's getting less and less reelectable by the day, and so they are preparing to deal with Romney, with the Romney administration. But if Romney does win, he can do a lot of damage to our movement by convincing a lot of naive conservatives to go along with the compromises that he will be able to talk them into. Remember Ronald Reagan? There are many similarities here. They tried to stop Reagan from getting the nomination, just like they tried to stop Romney. But Reagan won despite their efforts. Yet only minutes after Reagan's acceptance speech at the convention, according to my uncle, W. Cleon Skousen, the major news network's three heads held a private meeting with Reagan and threatened to destroy his bid in the media unless he took on George H.W. Bush as vice president with the exclusive powers to control the transition team that would determine who got hired into the White House West Wing. Now, they knew that Reagan already had shown significant tendencies to compromise as governor of California. I'm sure you're aware of that, Dan, because you were there.
Yes, I am. And apparently, they simply told him, Reagan, that they would do to him what they'd done to Goldwater, and he compromised his principles, and he accepted George Herbert Walker Bush as his vice president after having promised the leaders of the Christian movement that he would never accept George Herbert Walker Bush, member of Skull and Bones, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, member of the Bilderbergers, member of the Trilateral Commission, members of the Bohemian Grove, and former director of the CIA, all the qualifications to be an excellent traitor. And Reagan selected him because, of course, he did not have the courage to say, I'm going to do what's right. And we cannot have people in the White House or leading the conservative movement who are willing to compromise on anything.
Well, this is similar to Romney, of course. Romney comes from a conservative religion, a conservative background politically, and yet he compromised significantly as governor of Massachusetts. He got us started down the road on that mandatory participation in state-mandated health care. Well, they successfully did get Reagan to compromise on many issues during his presidency by surrounding him with controlled advisors. As a result, Reagan got talked into giving us the first amnesty for illegals. That was supposed to be the amnesty to end all amnesty, and it only encouraged more illegal immigration. And he also gave us the biggest tax increase in history, which was the doubling of the Social Security taxes.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Joel is simply talking that we have our precepts. You know, Ronald Reagan was a conservative, and he may well have really believed everything he said. However, he was willing to compromise. Most people think Ronald Reagan cut our taxes. Actually, he gave us the greatest tax increase we've ever known by doubling Social Security and Medicare, but we never talk about that. And he massively increased the power of government over many aspects of our lives and changed our immigration policies. And there were so many things that happened, but of course the conservatives never understood that Ronald Reagan had certainly been forced or coerced into changing his conservative principles. And of course it all came after the failed assassination attempt carried out by the son of a close friend of all people, George Herbert Walker Bush. Go ahead.
Well, you know, one of the biggest things that keeps Reagan looming so large in conservatives' minds is that the media have championed Reagan as the great person who brought down the Soviet Union. But that was a carefully crafted deception, aided and embedded by the Western media, which Reagan himself was ignorant of. Communism merely went underground, and its former behind-the-scenes Communist Party leaders raided the Soviet treasury by granting themselves free loans to buy up and privatize the productive state industries, and turned themselves into the early oligarchs. This allowed them to play the role of the corrupt, wealthy capitalists in order to cause a Hegelian dialectic there in Russia. Keep the people wedded to puppet presidents like Yeltsin and Putin, who claimed to be the enemy of the oligarchs. But nothing could be further from the truth, especially from Vladimir Putin. Putin met with chief oligarch Boris Berezovsky 5 times at a Spanish villa the year he ascended to the presidency, according to Spanish intelligence. I suspect that part of the media's purpose in praising Reagan for the phony collapse and giving him credit for the phony collapse of the Soviet Union was to keep conservatives from detecting this grandest of all modern deception. And it has worked like a charm. Conservatives hold to this fable of Reagan's success tenaciously, and it keeps them from seeing, even today, that Russia is a growing threat and will yet become the threat that brings us World War III. Now, one notable difference between the establishment handling of the Romney campaign versus Reagan is that the establishment, or is the choice, is in the choice of the way they handle the transition team. The vice presidency rarely plays an important role in the presidency except to gain votes during the election. Vice president generally picks either, attract votes from the South or the North if the president's from the South, or in other ways, they're going to probably pick someone that'll bring up Hispanic votes in this election. But there are 2 major exceptions to this where vice presidents had great power. The first was the George H.W. Bush vice presidency, which we've just talked about, and only because he was granted powers over the transition team, controlling hiring. And the second one was Dick Cheney, who actually was the handler of George W. Bush. First time a vice president's been the president's handler. Most of the time it's the national security advisor or someone on the chief of staff. But that's why Cheney had the largest staff in U.S. history for a vice president, almost 600 people attached to his office. And those were on and off the books. Not all of them were legally, assigned to his staff. But he controlled over 600 people who were placed in every agency of government to help to keep tabs on what was going on, as opposed to the normal vice president staff, 20 to 25 people. But this week, however, Mitt Romney announced that former Utah Governor and HEW Secretary Michael Leavitt would serve to head his transition team. Leavitt is a compromising conservative like Romney, who has an uncanny ability to get conservatives to accept socialist health programs while still thinking that they're on the right. While conservatives should be rightly concerned by this insurance executive, who after leaving the Bush cabinet turned into a professional lobbyist, helping states implement Obamacare exchanges, he will certainly have a role in implementing a Republican version of Obamacare if the Supreme Court rules Obamacare unconstitutional, which is likely to happen this next week. The big question on that constitutionalist is whether or not they will rule the rest of the program has to fall with the mandate, or whether or not they'll let the rest of it stand, in which version we're going to still have to deal with Obamacare raising health care costs and intruding into the medical system completely. The great thing about removing the mandate, of course, is that people like myself and others who believe in alternative medicine, which isn't covered by any of the health care insurance, will be free to put our money where we want to and won't be forced into this evil, drug-oriented medical.
Well, there was an article that came out just last week from a professor over in England pointing out that they have a list over there on how to get people to die, and they kill about 130,000 elderly citizens every year, so they put them on a no-treatment list so that they will be killed. And he commented how several of the people he'd gotten off the list and gotten them well, but they're going to do the same thing here in America. They're going to kill the elderly citizens because it's too expensive to care for them. Well, Joe, you go right ahead, but I will tell you this medicine, Obamacare, I think is going to be terribly dangerous. I think they're going to utilize this to kill the elderly. They cannot afford to take care of them. And we have 50 million people on Medicare today, and there's another 79 million going to come in the next 19 years. There is just not enough money to fund Medicare, and it's already running out of any trust fund. And so they're going to have to kill the elderly. And so they can't cut the doctors much further. Doctors are already dropping out of medicine. Unless, of course, we want to have all doctors from Pakistan. So this is going to be a true abomination. But go right ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. Let's talk about another abomination from Obama. All of us are disgusted by Obama's latest edict that grants amnesty to millions of illegals who came into the country at less than 16 years of age, retroactively to the last amnesty. When you calculate the retroactive provisions in his rewriting of the law, everyone 30 years and younger now gets access to a green card and becomes permanent aliens. Almost half of illegal aliens will qualify. This is a huge bid to buy Hispanic votes. As Judge Andrew Napolitano points out, this is also patently illegal and will be challenged to the courts for whatever that's worth, given the propensity of the courts to back government. He says it is a profound violation of the Constitution for the President to engage in rewriting the law. That's what he's done here. He's rewritten federal law. Only Congress can lay down specifics, such as in order to avoid deportation or qualify for a 2-year work visa, one must have entered the U.S. prior to age 16 and possess a valid American high school diploma, military veteran, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the criteria the President has written into an edict, and there's no legal basis for that. By altering the law in this manner, says Napolitano, by constructing the requirements the government will impose, the President has violated his oath to enforce the laws as they are written. His second responsibility in the Constitution, first is to defend it, of course, is to enforce federal laws as Congress has written, and hence the employment of the word faithfully in the constitutional oath, not as he wishes them to be.
Well, of course, the thing that bothers me about that, Joel, is that the leaders of the Republican Party are not demanding his immediate impeachment for suddenly violating the law and writing legislation he has no right to do. Where are the leaders of the Republican Party speaking out? And, of course, they're deafening in their silence.
Absolutely true. I agree. Next story is that Russia slows down Syrian intervention for now.
Hold that thought. We're going to bring our stations back in a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Sidney Joe was just talking about the fact that President Obama has changed their immigration laws. Basically, he has authorized that anybody who's been here for a certain number of years, up to a certain age, and simply has attended our schools, even though they're here illegally, if they have not committed a crime, they're going to be able to get a work permit and be able to stay here permanently. In other words, these people have been here for some years illegally. But, of course, we want, of course, them to be able to stay. Now, President Obama does not have the right to pass legislation, but this is what he's done. Congress wouldn't pass the legislation, so he did it by edict. But where is the outcry from the Republicans saying, this is unconstitutional, President, you don't have a right to do it, and we are going to demand your impeachment? And the leaders of the Republican Party refuse to take a stand against President Obama because so many of them have exactly the same globalist policies that President Obama does. But you have to give the American people the idea. We have a two-party system, so they'll never suspect what's really going on in the smoke-filled rooms back in Washington, D.C. Well, before we go on, Joel, I want you to tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, how they can subscribe to the World Affairs Brief, and how they can get your excellent books on preparedness.
Thanks, Dan. My World Affairs Brief comes out every Friday. I write a commentary on the news, much as we're hearing today, only much more expanded. People can get a free sample issue prior to subscribing to the World Affairs Brief by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. My books are showcased on my other website, joelskousen.com. That's Skousen, joelskousen.com. You can see pictures and details about each of my books. The primary bestseller is Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places. Many people are interested in relocating for safety, even if they can't leave major cities where their jobs are, at least in establishing safe havens or retreats. Well, my book also covers many, many ideas about how to secure your home in a major metropolitan area and prepare for a time when you may have to get out of Dodge. My largest book is The Secure Home, over 700 pages. It covers everything that you need to know about high-security construction in remodeling, new construction, or retreats. It covers generators, self-sufficiency, solar, all of the things that you need to install all the equipment. And my final book is How to Implement a High-Security Shelter in the Home, basically an architectural plan book on how to implement a safe room in a basement. And all three of these books are available from Radio Liberty.
By calling 1-800-544-8927. That's 1-800-544-8927. And these are amongst the best-selling books that we have. Joe, you go right ahead.
Let's talk now about the reaction to Russia's threat to send in military warships into the Syrian situation. It's kind of slowing down intervention for now, but I'll explain why I don't think it will stand up. Even the establishment press was aflame with news that Russia was sending in warships and attack helicopters to support the Assad regime in Syria, but it was more hype than reality. Despite Hillary Clinton's whining over the airwaves about offensive weapons and getting the Brits to revoke the insurance on one Russian arms vessel heading for Syria, the incoming helicopters turned out to be only refurbished attack helicopters that were being returned to Syria after refurbishing its factory in Russia. The warships were another matter. The two Russian warships around the mouth to Syria were assault troop ships, not anti-aircraft frigates, as one would expect if Russia were to decide to actively threaten the U.S.-NATO no-fly zone. Now, this is significant for a couple of reasons. One, it means that Russia will not engage the U.S. or NATO aircraft when the no-fly zone happens. And two, that Russian troops may be there simply as insurance against U.S. attack on a Russian naval base at Tartus. They could also be used as shock troops to stop rebel assaults that actually threaten Assad, but I think it's unlikely, given that the Syrian armed forces are some of the best in the Arab world and can hold their own against the rebels unless the U.S. and NATO start to attack them from the air in a phony labeling of a no-fly zone. These are actually attack zones as far as NATO aircraft are concerned. Now, if the Russians follow the pattern of letting allies fall to the U.S., as they did in Iraq and will do in Iran, they will also let Syria fall. However, they are inserting themselves more strongly in Syria than they did previously in Iraq, only to build up their reputation as, quote, the only ones who will stand up to the U.S. While I think that they won't follow through, it will continue to raise the world's expectation that Russia is the one to look to counter U.S. continual intervention around the world. This, combined with the growing reputation of the U.S. as the bully of the world, will continue to point to an eventual world war between the great superpowers, Russia and China, versus the U.S. and Europe.
And I think it's so vitally important that people understand it's all a facade. And you go back to what happened in 1918, today it was American corporations were over there helping establish the initial communist government. You go back to what happened after communism's so-called fall, in 1990, 1991, and you'll find out it was American corporations that went over to build the oil and gas wells that allowed to be Russia somewhat independent and become the largest exporter of both oil and natural gas in the world. It's all covered in a little booklet we have called the Communist Capitalist Alliance. But of course, you're supposed to think that there's this terrible conflict there, and there may well be. We may have another war with the Russians, but we've helped them at every step of the way, and we're still helping them behind the scenes today. They're hardly independent, but we'll have a war with them. After all, we had a war with Germany, and all during the war, American corporations were over there building the weapons for the Nazi forces. Go right ahead.
Well, of course, there's reason. There's method to their madness of building up enemies. As you've often introduced your show, the best enemies that Western money can buy. They put China, the Chinese communists, into power. They put the Vietnamese communists into power. They overruled the freedom fighters in Laos, in Somoza, in Nicaragua, in Cuba. They put Castro into power. Why do this? It's because through war, as you know, they create conflict, of which eventually they intend to convince the world the only way to remove this great conflict, to solve these great wars, is to have an internationalized government, an international world government with military power. And that's what I think this next war with Russia and China will do. I think that's why the U.S. is covering the Russian and Chinese military preparations and not warning the American people, so that when this surprise attack comes, they'll come out of their bunkers, claim that the Russians and Chinese deceived them, and that our only salvation now is to join a militarized world government to defeat them and prosecute this war. I think all your listeners will live to see what I'm just saying come true someday.
I agree. Go right ahead.
Well, in the meantime, they continue to slog ahead with their surrogates for world government. Right now, the G20 is one of the biggest formats for world government. They met this week at Los Cabos, Mexico. Los Cabos San Lucas is the full name. It did not go well at the G20 in that summit, and it didn't go well for the local inhabitants, who are always inconvenienced in the extreme by world police forces taking over the local airports and parts of their town for days. Anyone who experiences these global summit meetings in person ends up hating globalism, which is perhaps the only good thing to come out of these hugely expensive extravaganzas. Well, there was a lot of hand-wringing over the fate of the euro as increased bailouts were announced for Italy and Spain at the meeting. The shocking turnaround in the general election in Greece towards pro-bailout, pro-EU forces also gave a brief respite from the gloom that was present at the meeting. 2 rescue funds are to be used to buy the debts of the troubled economies, for the cost of which have reached record highs in recent weeks. In other words, the reason why they're bailing out or buying the debt is because private investors are not doing it, and they're charging for the privilege up to 7% interest rate, which Spain and Italy cannot afford to pay. It is hoped that the move, which represents a substantial shift in policy for Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, will send a strong signal to the financial markets. Of course, that's what they all try to do, is fool the markets into supporting these bailouts by joining in the buyout. Angela Merkel always threatens not to give in to the bailout, but always relents in the end as a globalist, and she keeps pumping up that we need to keep the euro together. So the communique issued at the end of the G20 summit, which finished in Mexico last night, said that European leaders had agreed to take action to bring down borrowing rates. Under the proposed deal, 2 European rescue funds, £400 billion or 500 billion euros stability mechanism will be implemented and will buy bonds of each of the European countries. So despite the naysayers who claim that the U.S. or that the EU is on the verge of collapse, the Europeans and American bankers continue to end up creating more money, keeping this mini New World Order very much intact. But the most obvious rift at G20 was between Russia and the U.S. Vladimir Putin was barely on speaking terms with Barack Obama, displaying an extreme disinterest in Obama's canned remarks about progress in their talks. Everyone noted the hostile body language of Putin. The Guardian thinks that there was some hard bargaining going on with Russia over the fate of Syria, which gave into this rift. The West is adamant about pushing out Assad prior to attacking Iran, to spare Israel the inevitable Iranian retaliation. Syria's huge batteries of missiles must be neutralized, because Syria would obviously join in that retaliation against Israel, and they have the biggest missile batteries in the area. According to The Guardian, Britain and America are willing to offer the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad safe passage and even clemency from his war crimes as part of a diplomatic push to convene a U.S.-sponsored conference on political transition in Syria. Well, I don't believe that for a minute. That's diplomatic euphemisms, of course, for the fact that they made a deal with Vladimir Putin to go along with that. I wouldn't hold out any hope for the West keeping their word on giving Assad clemency. They're probably trying for war crimes front like they did the Egyptian president, Musharraf. The U.S. has betrayed every other dictator that it promised asylum to if they would give up power, especially the pro-Western variety that the U.S. betrayed to the communists. It appears that the CIA has already picked its favored successor to Assad, however, similar in background to the Iraqi puppet Chalabi prior to the Iraq War. Daniel McAdams reports that the establishment CFR has been talking up Abdul Basit Tieda as the new Syrian Chalabi, calling him a moderate Kurd from Uppsala, Sweden. Yeah, they're always, outsiders who have long been outside the country, cultivated by the CIA, ready for their entrance to the country. Naturally, U.S. foreign policy establishment claims that Tieda is an independent, does not represent any single political party on the 300-member council. He only represents, of course, the CIA. Tieda has publicly repeated most of the positions the council has come to be known for: do not negotiate with Assad, continue to request foreign intervention, establish a no-fly zone, and a humanitarian corridor to ultimately unseat him. So the same pattern that happened in Libya and Egypt is happening again in Syria.
I think that people really don't understand. I mean, Yasser Arafat certainly was cultivated by the CIA for many years. The radical Ayatollah Khomeini was kept living in Paris and in palatial luxury for many years until we overthrew the Shah. And then the CIA flew the Ayatollah over to Tehran in 1979 and installed him as the dictator there. We installed dictators throughout the world. They're on our payroll. And there's a wonderful book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, written by a fellow on the inside. You may disagree with some of his views, but I think he gives a pretty good assessment of how we install dictators all throughout the world, and we continue to control them. To go right ahead.
Well, it might be interesting to your readers to know how the globalists won back Greece this week. Talk about pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Although I've always claimed the EU powers that the EU won't accept any country opting out of the euro, I thought they would be merely having to keep dealing with the far-left government that Greece would continue to elect in order to pacify the anti-austerity groundswell coming from the Greek electorate. Yes, Greece was on the verge of a rebellion against the EU's sanctions and bailout deal. The people still are. But this week, the Greek right-wing establishment came back from nowhere to win the election. Next week, a combination of the New Democracy Party, a phony right-wing party, and the PASOK center-left party will take up the reins of power again. Syriza, the near-majority party on the left, was expected by popular support to win, but that didn't happen. Let's see how they did it. So in order to permanently institutionalize turn and turnabout rule by the two major parties, they jointly cooked up a constitutional change last year that whichever of the two leading parties topped the polls would always earn a bonus reward of 50 seats in Parliament. So in terms of opinion polls, this is inside the usual 3% margin of error. All they had to do was manipulate the vote, which was fairly close between them, less than 3%, and the winner suddenly got an extra 50 seats in Parliament. That's enough to control Parliament, you see. And so that's how they did it. They simply had to corrupt enough votes to get the right-wing New Democracy Party to come out of nowhere and win, and suddenly they got a huge majority. So New Democracy gets 129 seats in the Wallis, the state parliament, while Syriza, which scored statistically close to the same tally votes, gets a measly 72 votes. But you see what it does, it gives the new winning party a majority control of Parliament that can pass anything they want.
So much for democracy. Go right ahead.
Well, in like manner, the Arab Spring support, so-called revolt in Egypt is wilting as we speak. Once more, the establishment powers continue to maintain power despite defeat at the polls. Days before the Muslim Brotherhood, through Mohammed Morsi, won the presidential election in Egypt, the military announced changes to the constitution, allowing them to maintain complete independence of civilian control. I mean, this is just incredible. We just changed the Constitution by declaration, bypassing the legal route shortly before the end of voting. And basically, it says that makes it obligatory for Egypt's new president to secure the approval of the ruling military before going to war. It also gives the generals who have been governing Egypt since Hosni Mubarak's ouster in February the legislative powers after the country's highest court invalidated the lower house of Parliament. The military will also have the power to form an assembly to write a permanent constitution in 3 months' time, starting from the day of its creation. I mean, it's just an incredible thing. And it's no wonder that people are rioting in the streets again, and their Arab Spring has been stripped from them.
Well, because we remember back, Sydney, when we had the hanging chads there in Florida, what was that, the year 2000, and of course the Supreme Court just said, we are in charge, and George Bush won, and the American people took it, Where did the Supreme Court of the United States come out to tell the states how their vote was? But of course, basically we're told, we got to be law-abiding citizens. Whatever the Supreme Court says is right, even though it doesn't have any authority. And I'm sure they do this all throughout the world today, and most people just accept it because they want to lead peacefully. Well, Joel, we've got 3 minutes to wrap up the program.
Well, I guess the thing I'd like to point out is the discouraging fact that every time we build up opposition, for example, to Fast and Furious, just a grave scandal of massive exporting of weapons to the drug cartels of Mexico. The administration claimed this was to track them and capture them. Well, you don't have to export 3,000 weapons to be able to track where they're going. 2 or 3 would have done if you were going to do a sting operation. This is clearly something that was done to beef up the relationship between the dark side of the U.S. government and the Mexican cartels, which have been channeling drugs for years into the U.S. as part of a way of funding U.S. black operations and corrupting the American people. The wars between drug people are wars between the competing up-and-coming cartels and the establishment Mexican government, CIA-controlled cartels. And all of this blew up over Fast and Furious, and it's just amazing how the government has been able to block this probe by Representative Darrell Issa. A dramatic move just this week, Obama declaring that he was invoking executive privilege to stop Eric Holder from submitting any documents to Congress. This is thumbing their nose at Congress. It's just incredible. They're going to hold... they voted to hold Eric Holder in contempt, but now they'll have a legal out because he is supposedly in a bind between the presidents. There's just no way we seem to be able to win these contests when we oppose. They always come up with legal maneuvers that are backed by the courts. And that's what happens when you have a conspiracy of power that controls probably 75% of Congress, the entire executive, and probably 80% of the judiciary. We're up against a real bad system.
Well, what we need to do is just get the American people concerned and hope they still value freedom enough. When there are enough people to be concerned, well, they're not going to be able to put this over because I'll tell you there's an increasing awareness within our military that this is all phony, which is why Ron Paul has so much more support from the military than all of the other political candidates combined.
Well, we'd certainly better prepare for a takedown, though. We've got to prepare to lose as well as to try to gain back our liberty. We cannot afford to be unprepared should the worst case happen to us.
Amen. Well, we've just got about 30 seconds. Your parting thought for our listeners.
Well, I think it's ever more important for us to look strongly at who we should support to back the Ron Paul movement if he passes on. I don't have any real good ideas at this point, but I think we really need to look forward to that.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. And, Chris, Joel is just saying who is going to pick up the leadership of the freedom movement when Ron Paul, if he is, begins to fade away. We have all of our confidence in one man. He's a brilliant guy, and I like Ron Paul very much. But, of course, he is not going to be here 4 years from now. And his son, Rand Paul, has shown that he's quite willing to compromise. And we cannot compromise, not with evil. Joel, thanks very much. We'll look forward to talking to you next week.
And we'll see you on tomorrow morning on American Freedom Stand.
Okay, wonderful. God bless, and thanks so much. Okay, well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly this is the time when I need, of course, to remind our listeners that my ministry, Radio Liberty, is primarily listener-supported, and we always look forward to having you join the Radio Liberty family of supporters. And if you're in a position to do it, give us a call at 1-888-24-LIBERTY or 464-8295. Or if you're in a position to advertise a product with us, boy, we'd appreciate that. But we do need, of course, the support so we can maintain certainly the almost 70 outlets we have every single week, as at least somewhere in America, people are getting the truth. And we've got some great and exciting things to tell you that'll be coming up in this next couple of weeks. I think you'll be fascinated by the information, but I'm not at liberty to tell you what it is, so you're just going to have to keep on listening. Well, if you haven't read my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, you need to. You need to hear my talk on the Forbidden Secret and on the Dark Secret and get the syllabuses to go with them so that you're sure that I'm telling you the truth. You need my interview with Norman Dodd, the director of the Reese Committee, the only congressional committee ever allowed to investigate the great tax-exempt foundations and the Council on Foreign Relations. And what they found, you'll find in my interview with Norman Dodd in our DVD, The Dangerous Deception. And then, of course, we would hope that you'd want to get our latest DVD. It's called Population Control, the Covert Agenda. And there is a covert agenda behind population control, which is not what most people think. It's not simply abortion and sterilization. The ramifications are beyond the belief of the finite mind, and seem to be the fulfillment of the prophecies laid out in Revelation 6:8. And go and get Revelation 6:8 and read it, and then of course watch my talk on and there's the DVD on the population control, the covert agenda. They're all available by calling 1-800-544-8927, 1-800-544-8927, or certainly you can go to our webpage at radioliberty.com. Your job is to get other people listening to our programs. Try to get them to think. Try to get them to understand that we're headed towards a financial catastrophe that is going to destroy the value of our currency. And if that takes place, why, everything they have worked their whole lives for, their life savings, their pensions, their insurance policies, their stocks, their bonds, everything is going to be destroyed in value. You must understand what is happening financially, and certainly we have a couple of great talks on the financial tsunamis, one of my favorite ones. I gave it a number of years ago, but nothing has really changed. You need to certainly get the background of the monetary system. My simple little pamphlet on the history of money, and then of course my pamphlet on prophetic warning. It's an analysis of a speech that was given in 1837 by Andrew Jackson. I think you'll find it fascinating because exactly the same things are happening today. And of course we're still involved in the same battle against the people who control the great banks. But of course what people do not understand is that our banking system is today, as it has been in the past, controlled by the forces of darkness. Remember, it was Jesus who threw the money changers out of the temple.